The Glasgow Herald is one of Scotland's most notable newspapers. It comes from humble beginnings owned by a sole owner, to being one of the most successful newspapers of the 19th century, to being operated by a large media company in the 21st century. Most of my description of the Herald, as it is more commonly called, will focus on the 19th century, but it's worth looking into its history on a larger level before I begin. The Herald is one of Scotland's foremost newspapers, in part because of its history and in part because of its success. From its inception, it has been a family-oriented newspaper which accommodated a wide range of information and perspectives. It has provided a consistent, balanced outlook on Scottish news and Scottish life throughout most of its lifetime, and it has continued to endear readers well into the 21st century. John Menzies founded the weekly publication in 1783. When Menzies published the first number on January 27th, it was called the Glasgow Advertiser and Evening Intelligencer. In 1794, it became simply the Glasgow Advertiser before becoming the Herald and Advertiser in 1802. Menzies assumed most of the responsibility when the papers first began in 1783. He was the owner, editor, publisher, and printer for the newspaper's first 9 or 10 years. His responsibilities continued as the paper changed names, but he received help from his son, Thomas Menzies, who helped with the newspaper operations until he passed away in 1804. Thomas's inclusion in newspaper operation reveals an interesting shift in management structure from a one-man operation to a management team. A more complex management network began to emerge around the turn of the century, when the newspaper brought on Dr. James McNair as a managing partner in November 1802. He lasted only 2 months, leaving the newspaper in January 1803. Why he left is uncertain, and even the centenary of the Glasgow Herald's history cannot explain McNair's sudden departure. A rift between McNair and other newspaper administrators is certainly the cause of his departure, but details of this rift are sparse. Shortly after McNair's departure, however, the paper brought on Samuel Hunter, who would stay on as managing partner until 1837. Hunter and his company managed the publication while Hunter assumed primary editorial responsibilities. He brought unprecedented stability and vision to the paper, vaulting it towards unprecedented success. He oversaw the name change from the Herald and Advertiser to the Glasgow Herald and started the newspaper on a path that has endured for more than 2 centuries. Hunter is even considered the true founder of the Glasgow Herald in some circles, such as Electric Ireland, which is affiliated with the Centre for Scottish Studies at Simon Fraser University. This resource describes Hunter as, quote, a man of wit, kindly, genial, moderate, clear-sighted, and of firm integrity, qualities which he impressed upon the journal under his charge, and to which it owed its success. His jokes and smart sayings were repeated at every table in Glasgow, and even yet are not quite forgotten. The Herald flourished as a moderately conservative publication under Hunter's supervision. He has widely been described as a brilliant editor who ably managed the ins and outs of newspaper life. He brought a larger vision to the paper and stabilized daily operations. Hunter's tenure lasted until 1836-1837, when George Outram's company took control of the paper. This company's tenure endured for over a century until 1964. Outram originally practiced as an Edinburgh lawyer, and he accepted the Herald's editor position in May 1837. At that time, he was paid £400 annually for his services. He was offered a partnership in the paper soon after, and moved to Glasgow to focus on the publication. Outram was a conservative, but he was moderate in his stance. He advocated Scottish nationalist causes through organisations like the National Association for the Vindication of Scottish Rights movement. He was also not totally opposed to Corn Laws, although he certainly was not a sympathizer. Both of these beliefs, nationalism and the Corn Laws, are reflected in the Glasgow Herald, which Outram used to promote the Scottish rights movement and to lessen vehement anti-Corn Law sentiments. His company's tenure saw the Herald transform from a moderately conservative publication to a moderately liberal publication, a stance which it maintained for most of the 19th century and beyond. It was never radically liberal or conservative, which ultimately enabled it to avoid the divisive polemical politics that hindered many UK publications in the 19th century. When Outram died in 1856, his publishing firm continued to produce the Glasgow Herald. At this time, James Pegan took over as editor. He had been a part of the Glasgow Herald staff since 1839, so he was familiar with the newspaper's operations and had his own vision for the paper's direction, as I will discuss shortly when I look at the paper's frequency. Pegan was originally a reporter for the Herald, and he balanced editorial responsibilities for the Prospective Observer at the same time. He also reported for the Times in London in the late 1850s and the 1860s, but he was always loyal to the Herald. He became a sub-editor for the paper as Outram's health began to deteriorate. His knowledge of the Herald and his editorial experience made him an excellent choice to continue the publication, and he did not disappoint in this role. The paper continued to flourish under his guidance, and it provided astute news, political commentary, and religious speeches that attracted a wide readership in Glasgow and beyond. Originally a weekly publication, the Herald became a twice-weekly publication in 1792, before it was even the Herald. A thrice-weekly publication ensued in 1855. The major transformation occurred in 1858 after the Stamp Act was abolished, however, when editor James Pegan and George Outram's company transformed the publication into Scotland's first daily newspaper. With the Stamp Act, Sinclair says that the paper paid over £21,000 in taxes per year. The Act's abolition enabled the newspaper's management to channel the extra capital into new ventures to expand the newspaper's production. Under this new daily form, it was able to better cater to its family readership, providing daily news of local and national events. The Herald reached its climax during the period after 1855, when it achieved a circulation of over 500,000 per annum. In fact, the Herald has typically held strong circulation numbers, with most of its weekly publications circulating over 4,000 copies per week. This increase is due largely to Outram's management, which grew the paper's circulation extensively over the years and ultimately enabled it to publish more frequently. It thrived just as much as a daily publication, achieving an annual publication of approximately 780,000 in 1858. By 1881, its influence had diminished, but its circulation continued to hover around 50,000 copies. It would be easy to assume that the Herald achieved strong and stable success throughout most of the 19th century. It vaulted into the upper echelon of Scottish publishing to become one of the UK's most influential daily and/or weekly newspapers of the period. However, Alexander Sinclair's memoir reveals a precarious situation that all newspapers faced. Sinclair explains how printing and publishing companies' business always relied on some good fortune. These companies faced the risk of an unexpected disaster, among which fire was a primary issue. Sinclair explains that other businesses could relocate their premises temporarily or ask their clients to be patient while they rebuilt following a fire. However, printing presses and newspapers depended on the regularity of their publications. The more frequent the publication, the more necessary regularity and predictability were. The Glasgow Herald's daily and weekly frequency made its situation among the most precarious in the UK, and the proprietors were always conscious of the threat that fire posed to their business. Fire was a reality that could cripple a business, so despite the Herald's success, there were a few close calls. Even though Sinclair acknowledges that they had fire insurance and a working relationship with the local firefighters, they could not afford to lose even part of their resources to fire. The Herald's prosperity and future often rested on a razor's edge, but rescue teams always succeeded. Electric Scotland explains of one fire at the Herald offices sometime in 1809 or 1810. The primary problem that rescue teams faced was getting water to the fire with enough regularity to extinguish the flames. Although this aspect was challenging given the office location and proximity to a water source, the crews were able to salvage the premises and the Herald continued. Alexander Sinclair explains that the Herald offices on Buchanan Street in Glasgow, where they were from 1868 through the 1880s, survived 4 fires throughout its time. This number was high, but most of these fires were serious. What makes them even more alarming is that none of these fires originated at the Herald offices, so no matter how careful the workers and proprietors were, circumstances beyond their control affected their fate. To think that all precautions to avoid fire could be taken and they would still not be enough drives home the reality that these newspaper people dealt with every day. Sinclair discusses one instance where he was awoken in the middle of the night while he was in London on business. He was told that the Glasgow office's roof was on fire because of a fire which consumed a neighboring building. The fire had spread across rooftops, and rescue teams feared that the entire block was going to be consumed by the flames. The newspaper employees were rescuing whatever equipment they could, but Sinclair was helpless in London as he awaited news at 4 a.m. An 1883 fire threatened the entire block as well, and the entire neighborhood was evacuated. Sinclair was able to convince a fireman to hose down the editorial floor, thus saving many of the Herald's resources and a crucial floor for the business. Ultimately, the Herald offices under Sinclair's direction installed an automatic water sprinkler system. Yes, you heard that correctly, an indoor water sprinkler system in 1888. They also installed perforated pipes through which they could circulate water in the event of a fire. Think of a modern-day eaves trough contraption. The combination of the two systems saved the Glasgow offices in 1892 when another fire ignited on the premises' roof. The Herald continued to operate successfully well beyond its height as Scotland's top newspaper in the 1850s. Its publication persisted into the late century and it maintained its status as one of the UK's top publications. Despite new forms of competition, political and social challenges, and technological shifts in the industry, the Herald continued production throughout the 20th century. Today, the publication is operated by NewsQuest Media Group. It continues to flourish, with its circulation exceeding 34,000 according to its 2015 audit. It is published 6 days per week, excluding Sunday. It endures despite increasing trepidation among newspaper companies and sympathizers as technology expands. The Herald persists in an increasingly challenged market that continues to morph into new forms and mediums. Given the adversity that it has endured over its lifetime, I am confident with saying that the Glasgow Herald has established a brand that can adapt and that the next iterations of this newspaper stand as good a chance as any publication which seeks success in our ever-evolving technological world. If you want to learn more about the Herald, some resources that I recommend you begin with include the following. The Waterloo Directory is integral to this project, but especially so for the Glasgow Herald. The directory covers the early years of this publication thoroughly, adding detailed circulation information and astute details about its political and social allegiances as the 19th century progressed. The Glasgow Herald released a Centenary Edition in 1882, which covers much of the newspaper's publication history. It's an enriching publication which I discovered is now available in full text on Google Books. For a biography of George Outram, I recommend the Dictionary of National Biography, which covers his life fairly extensively. Extensive information about the Menons is scarce, and it would be worth delving into their history more in the future. Alexander Sinclair, a managing partner for the Herald in the mid-19th century, wrote a book about the Herald's history. It covers some of the more esoteric aspects of newspaper publishing that often get lost over the course of time, such as fires, printing press practices, and advertising prices, types, and changes. Finally, Electric Scotland, a website produced in conjunction with the Centre for Scottish Studies at Simon Fraser University, provides interesting information about Scottish antiquities and, specific to this project, Samuel Hunter. It's a great resource that I've only begun to tap into, so I suggest that you consult it at some point in your research. Although there's been a lot said about the Glasgow Herald and that there's been a lot of research conducted on it, I think that we've only touched the tip of the iceberg on this subject. I really think that there's a lot more that lies beneath the surface of this newspaper as far as editing, publishing practices, and Stamp Act problems that I really think that need further consideration and further delving. So I encourage you to look into it a lot more. I enjoyed my time a lot with this publication, and I thank you for watching.